because I'm aware that it might not have an answer, but I have encountered many examples of how life imitates art in my own life, and I'm pretty sure that you might have too, even unconsciously. I really think that, this is quite a philosophical subject, but it is really visible, especially in pop culture, which will be my focus today, as this is something that we may not pay attention to, and it is kind of overlooked, but I think it will capture your attention more than fine arts, and I really want to keep you entertained at least for 10 minutes. Yeah. So to begin with, on a bit lighter note, I will show you an example that I thought of when I was way younger. Because as a child, I would always watch romantic comedies and not understand the idea of acting. And I always thought that the on-screen couples must be in love in real life. Like, I couldn't comprehend that it is all staged. And in fact, it is sometimes true. Like, take a look at Mr. and Mrs. Smith, for example, and the big beginning of Brangelina. This movie was a major blockbuster when it was released, mainly because of the rumors that these two, so Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, were flirting on set. And soon enough, these rumors came true, and they started dating. So something that was made for artistic purposes first, which was their relationship, was later on translated into real life. And I know that it might all sound quite silly, but I really think that this is just a good beginning to show you how, we do not really notice how those philosophical aspects, that is life imitating art, really are, even in those really minor things. So, yeah. And maybe let's talk about a bit about the background of this question, which is a rather intellectual one. I really like to add some philosophical value. So this whole concept of life imitating art originated from Plato, who was an ancient Greek philosopher. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the Plato's cave example. And he thought that what we experience here in our earthly life is merely a depiction or an embodiment of what he called the second or the after one. And I know it might sound a bit too far-fetched, but it really fits into this whole narrative because according to Plato, we might say that those profound ideas that laid foundation for our life, and that is art, for example, are depicted in our existence. So yeah, it's even visible through those little things like pop culture. And I think that the other opinion, that the other question, whether life imitates art imitates life, I think it's pretty obvious, and the question is not if, but rather to what extent, because painters for centuries dealt with finding beauty in the mundane or depicting landscapes. So yeah, really trying to imitate people's lives in their works. So yeah, as I was saying, just to maybe make it more interesting, I will focus on the other concept. And I would like to start with, thank you. I would like to start with an example that I'm sure you all are familiar with, and these are The Simpsons. I mean, there are a lot of myths about Simpsons predicting the future. Not all of them are necessarily true, but this one is. And this is the Trump's case, that in 2000's episode called Park to the Future, they predicted that he would become, he would not only participate in the election, but he would win. And so he did. In 2016, he became the president of the United States. And it really was kind of an abstract idea back then, because he was just this wealthy businessman, kind of trying to not pay taxes, so that wasn't really political of him. And even if life does imitate art here, I'm sure it happens quite unconsciously. Like Donald Trump certainly did not participate in the election because he wanted to mirror The Simpsons. But I think that this sort of odd prediction really just shows, really adds depth into the whole life and art discussion. But from what I've watched, they did not predict him being re-elected, so that's good. Yeah, so maybe a bit more of an intellectual perspective. I will talk about the novel of 1984 that I'm sure you're all way too familiar with. It was written by George Orwell shortly after the Second World War, and he envisions there a very oppressive totalitarian regime with the head of the government being referred to as the Big Brother. Certainly this is the case of his really broad political and societal knowledge, but his predictions are really, really accurate. And as far as I'm very far from supporting any conspiracy theories, it is true that our world today, with propaganda or mass surveillance technologies or facial recognition, algorithms, whatever, it really resembles the one that Orwell envisioned. And I think that technology is what enabled his artistic vision to be translated into real life. And this is also really visible in the language, because in the book the characters used newspeak, which was a language designed to kind of limit their vision of the life, really, and it made them misunderstand or oversimplify complex political issues. And this really is the case today, for example, with headlines and fake news, because they really falsify and limit our perception of reality. So, yeah, I guess that's a very uncanny vision. Not to mention that sometimes real life even exceeds those artistic visions. And I'm talking about North Korea, for example. Like, they basically eradicate branches of culture and history in order for it to maintain the narrative of power of the ruling family. So, yeah, I would say that this relationship between art and life here really is quite disturbing. And perhaps it all happens coincidentally, maybe, but it was to some extent a very accurate prediction. However, I would really like to kind of keep a positive outlook on that, because, as I said, we probably are very familiar with this book. So I think that its cautionary message that was spread into the awareness that it gave us also inspired us to create new ways for us to live. I mean, the imitations of art and life really also gave it a new dimension, and I'm talking about, I don't know, like media or civil society or the non-governmental organizations or anything. You know, we as the readers of this book have really took its predictions and started doing something with it. At least I want to believe so. And last but not least, something for the film roast, and I actually have to break the first rule and talk about Fight Club. So this cultural phenomenon was originally a book written by Polak in 1999, but it gained like wider recognition because of the film, with its absolutely wonderful cast of Brad Pitt, Edward Norton, and Helena Bonham Carter. And I mean, to be fair, it is quite a complex movie. Not all the interpretations kind of encompass all of the themes that are there, but I think the message of it is quite clear in some cases, and I know it's definitely a critique of consumerism, and I will talk about that later, but also about how violence is used really purposelessly today in our world. So it is really weird and disturbing how the imitations of art in our life really took the message literally. I mean, after this movie was released, mainly in the US, people started making their own literal fight clubs and fighting themselves, which really is contradictory to the film's intention, because it's criticized that it was so not for violence being used senselessly and to emphasize power. And also, as I said, it was also pretty much a visible critique of consumerism, so it is quite funny how, and ironic, how, you know, there's all this merchandise from Fight Club, like posters or t-shirts or even the bars of soap. So I would say that reality here, life, really added new dimension to art, kind of contradictory to what the author is intended, but it is still a dynamic relationship that is worth looking at. However, at the end of the day, I would really like to emphasize how maybe the question isn't so important, and as I said, it might not even have an answer, but I hope that by providing a variety of those examples, I've shown you that it is the relationship and it is the interplay that is so important, because, you know, whether it's life depicting art very literally or giving it new dimension or reflecting the art or challenging it, really one makes the other alive and they are vital, they need each other. So I think that the beauty lies in their constant interactions that luckily gave me material to talk to you about all of this, so thank you.